September 1993, Jackson Hole, Wyoming. A ranch called the JY in the shadow of the Tetons, owned by Lawrence Rockefeller, philanthropist, conservationist, heir to one of the great American fortunes. According to a network map drawn the following year by a researcher we will meet and flag later in this episode, a small group gathers at the ranch that month to talk about flying saucers. A Navy physicist, a television producer, a doctor who wants to signal the aliens with lights. And coordinating it, the account says, a courteous, silver-haired former naval intelligence officer named Cecil B. Scott Jones. Within 2 years, a memo circulating inside the UFO organizations will record, as a settled fact in passing, that the man who owns this ranch has already sat down on this same property with the First Lady of the United States and with the President's science advisor to press the White House to acknowledge what he believes the government knows about UFOs. A private fortune lobbying a sitting administration on the subject of extraterrestrial life. It has a name in the literature now, the Rockefeller Initiative. And 5 years before that memo, on July the 13th, 1988, the courteous naval intelligence officer had already put the whole architecture in writing on United States Senate letterhead in a letter he ordered the recipient to return. He described his own value in one word.
Since my effectiveness is directly related to being invisible, except to those directly involved in the process.
Invisible. Political aides do not describe themselves as invisible. Assets do. That's tradecraft language. And he wrote it down on the letterhead of a United States senator to a man he knew was a government-controlled informant. This episode is about what the deception grew into when it stopped wearing a uniform. It got a foundation, it got a pole, it got a prince and a billionaire, and a ranch with a haunted history that the previous owners say never happened.
10 episodes ago, we told you deception was a profession. This is the episode where it becomes an industry. This is the deception thread. Episode 11, the infrastructure. Start with the man, because the network is built in his image. Cecil B. Scott Jones, Navy fighter pilot in Korea, 2 combat tours flying the Panther off the USS Princeton, then roughly 15 years in naval intelligence, assistant naval attaché in New Delhi and Kathmandu, intelligence collection across South Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, head of the Missiles and Astronautics Division at the Navy's Scientific Intelligence Center, a briefer to the President's Scientific Advisory Committee. And when he leaves the Navy, the file gets more interesting, not less. From 1979 to 1981, he works for the private intelligence firm Khaki as its liaison to the Defense Intelligence Agency. The archive's own biographical note records that he spent 10% of that time on what he called applied anomalous phenomena. Sit with that. A defense contractor's DIA liaison in 1979, formally spending 1/10 of his working hours on the paranormal, documented in the repository's own words. Then a research firm called Kamen Tempo, analyzing nuclear tests for the Defense Nuclear Agency. It is there, in 1983, that he meets a United States senator with a lifelong interest in the unexplained, Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In January 1985, Pell makes Jones his special assistant. What does a special assistant to the chairman of Foreign Relations do all day? In Jones's case, by every account in the record, friendly and hostile, he goes to UFO conferences, parapsychology symposia. He chairs panels on abduction research. He escorts a European head of state to psychic laboratories. He is appointed, in 1989, MUFON's consultant in international relations, a formal post inside the largest civilian UFO organization in America, held by a serving Senate aide with 15 years of naval intelligence behind him. In 1989, he also founds a nonprofit, the Human Potential Foundation. Its board includes Senator Pell. Its money, the record says, comes from Pell and from Lawrence Rockefeller. Now the letter. July the 13th, 1988, Senate letterhead, addressed to William L. Moore, the Roswell author you met in episodes 8 and 9, the man who a year later would stand on a stage in Las Vegas and confess to working as a controlled government informant against his fellow researchers. Jones has just visited Moore's office, and he writes this.
In reflection upon our conversation in your office last month, I reaffirm my willingness to play a quiet supporting role in facilitating the articulation of a changing government policy in sharing information with the public about ET encounters.
A changing government policy. In 1988, 29 years before the New York Times story that the world would call disclosure, a Senate aide is telling a government informant in writing that a policy shift is underway and that he will quietly help articulate it. Then the lawyers move.
Until I see how this may work out, this is a personal offer that does not involve Senator Pell in any way.
A personal offer written on the senator's letterhead over the senator's aide's title. The institution lends the credibility, the sentence takes it back. Intelligence officers have a name for that structure. The principle is protected, the contact is deniable, and the man in the middle, the cutout, carries the relationship in his own name. And then the instruction that tells you Jones knew exactly what kind of letter this was.
I ask you to honor our agreement not to make any copies of this letter, and to return it to me when this effort is over, or when it is determined that my offer to assist is not accepted.
And how do we know what the letter says? Because Moore kept it. Of course he kept it. The man spent a decade holding leverage over his handlers. It's the most consistent thing about him. Jones asked for the letter back, and 30-something years later, it surfaces in the Bill Moore files, which is where I read it. One document, self-described invisibility, principal deniability, operational security instructions, and a stated mission, shifting public disclosure policy, 5 years before the Rockefeller Ranch and 29 years before the Times. You don't need me to interpret it. He interpreted himself.
To be precise about the flags, the letter is documented. It exists, it is dated, it is signed. What the letter means, that Jones was running as a cutout for some official effort, is an inference. A strong one in tradecraft terms. But the file contains no order appointing him, and no principal above him has ever been identified on paper. Documented letter, contested interpretation. Now, and the reason we know as much as we do about Scott Jones is that in 1992, somebody did our job in real time. Robert Durant, an airline pilot and self-described nuts and bolts ufologist from Pennington, New Jersey. In February 1992, he circulated a 24-page monograph with a title that tells you his temperament. Will the real Scott Jones please stand up? It is dry. It is sourced. It reaches, he insists, no conclusions. And then, in the cover letter, he permits himself one speculation.
The common wisdom is that when one combines big money, plus backing from a key congressman, plus Pentagon and intelligence community interest, very positive action will result. If nothing else emerges from these pages, it is that all these factors are in place. But ufology and parapsychology remain cottage industries. When such stunning resources are focused, but nothing other than a series of social gatherings results, it is likely that this consequence is deliberate.
Deliberate. Durant's reading of the Jones Network in 1992 was that it existed to monitor the field, and in his words, to control public disclosure of the UFO phenomenon, which unfortunately involved preventing systematic scientific research. He noticed something else too. For all the wealth around Jones, a senator, a Rockefeller, a reigning prince, the money never seemed to arrive anywhere. 2 major parapsychology laboratories closed for lack of funds in those exact years. The society Jones himself presided over was sliding toward bankruptcy. Durant put it in one sentence.
The flow of information and money appears to be to Scott, not from him.
A collection network, in other words, not a funding network. And Durant asked in print in 1992 whether Jones's stewardship of the American Society for Psychical Research was following the same pattern this series showed you in episode 7, the capture and quiet strangulation of NICAP, pliant board appointments, financial hollowing, research replaced by gatherings. He could not prove it. He just laid the 2 patterns side by side and let the reader look. 25 years before anyone said the words "to the stars," a private citizen with a library card had mapped the architecture. The monograph was there for anyone to read. Almost nobody did.
Durant matters to me personally because he's proof of concept. He had no clearances, no budget, no subpoena, just documents and discipline, and he got it essentially right in February 1992. When I apply the same structural analysis to the 2017 disclosure wave, people call it conspiracy thinking. Fine. Then Durant was a conspiracy thinker with a 30-year head start, and the thing he predicted kept happening on schedule. At some point, the more economical explanation is that the structure is real.
One more data point on Jones, and it cuts in his favor. This show argues both sides. In 1990, he traveled to Beijing, met the leadership of China's UFO research organization, and came home with metal filings said to be from a UFO crash site in Henan province. He had them tested at 2 independent laboratories. The result, a common aluminum alloy, terrestrial, no anomalies. And Jones reported the negative result plainly to 700 ufologists at the 1991 MUFON Symposium. A pure disinformation agent doesn't do that. A collection officer might, a sincere believer certainly would. Hold all 3 of those possibilities. The file supports every one of them. In the summer of 1991, 100,000 American mental health professionals received an unusual package in the mail. Inside was a glossy report titled Unusual Personal Experiences, an analysis of 3 national surveys conducted by the Roper organization between July and September of that year. Its startling arithmetic, as promoted by the abduction researchers who designed the questions, was that 1 American in 50 millions of people might have been abducted by UFO occupants without knowing it. The mailing alone, printing and postage, is estimated in a contemporaneous account at $150,000. Who pays to teach an entire clinical profession that their patients' nightmares may be alien abductions? The commissioning client on the record was the Bigelow Holding Corporation of Las Vegas. We will meet its owner in Act 3. But Robert Bigelow's own afterword to the report contains a sentence that should stop you. He thanks a co-sponsor, who asked for anonymity. 2 independent contemporaneous sources, Durant's monograph and a sardonic insider account of the 1992 MIT conference preserved in Stanton Friedman's files, identify that anonymous co-sponsor as His Serene Highness Prince Hans Adam II of Liechtenstein, reigning monarch, controlling shareholder by contemporary press accounting of the Bank of Liechtenstein, and through it a $3.3 billion asset manager in London. A European head of state quietly co-funding an American opinion survey about alien abduction. That identification is as close to confirmed as the private record gets. Multiple independent sources, no contradiction. His motive, we do not know. And who is the prince's American access broker? Scott Jones. Durant records it plainly. Jones escorted Hans Adam to parapsychological laboratories and UFO conferences. When abduction researchers convened an invitation-only conference at Virginia Tech in January 1990, 70 clinicians and physicists, no press allowed, the prince was its major benefactor, and Jones chaired a panel and, in Durant's words, acted as liaison with the Prince of Liechtenstein. European royal money, American philanthropic money, a Senate office, and the largest civilian UFO network in the country, all flowing through one retired intelligence officer. By early 1992, that infrastructure was complete. And Robert Bigelow hadn't even fully arrived yet.
Notice what the poll actually is as an instrument. It's not measuring belief. It's manufacturing a baseline, a big, respectable, Roper-branded number that says this is happening to millions of Americans. And then it's delivered free to the exact profession that sits across from confused, frightened people and tells them what their experiences mean. Seed the clinicians, and the clinicians seed the caseload. And the caseload becomes the evidence at the next conference. That's the gardening grammar from episode 3, running in peacetime on private money.
The proof of concept came 10 months later at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. June 1992. The Abduction Study Conference, 5 days, roughly 100 invited attendees, organized by an MIT physicist, David Pritchard, and a Harvard psychiatrist, John Mack. Attendees sign a secrecy pledge. Selected media are allowed in: the Boston Globe, the New Yorker, the Atlantic. Independent skeptics, and even eminent believers like Stanton Friedman and Jacques Vallée, are not. The benefactors, per the insider account in Friedman's files, Robert Bigelow and Prince Hans Adam of Liechtenstein. That account, 3 typewritten pages by an author hiding behind the pseudonym Drano the Sewarian, a drain cleaner of UFO nonsense, asks the questions that still matter. Why were the credible independents excluded, while military and intelligence figures attended freely? Colonel John Alexander was there, then managing anti-materiel technology at Los Alamos, a career Army intelligence officer whose network you will keep meeting. So, the account says, was a former CIA scientist, Christopher Kit Green, the man who ran what he himself called the agency's weird desk. The pseudonymous author assigned them bird names from the aviary, penguin, blue jay. Those code names are contested single source, and we do not lean on them. The attendance is not seriously disputed. And the account's sharpest question was structural. The conference proceedings would not appear for months, so who was the event actually for?
The real audience could not have been ufologists. They were standing outside the door. 100 people inside signed secrecy pledges, which, think about it, does nothing to advance research and everything to facilitate whoever came to monitor. Wealthy private funders, intelligence community observers, secrecy requirements, hand-picked press. Hold that structure in your mind, because 15 years later, a government program called OSAP is going to look exactly like it. Same funders, some of the same faces, with a Defense Intelligence Agency contract number stapled to the front.
And the media wave rose right on cue. Durant, writing in February 1992, before the conference, counted it off with a growing unease. Howard Blum's UFO book headed for a summer movie, a sympathetic abduction article in the Atlantic Monthly, a Sidney Sheldon thriller with a Roswell appendix for his millions of readers, a 4-hour CBS docudrama on abductions scheduled for May. Bud Hopkins' colleague David Jacobs suddenly placed at the prestigious House of Scribners. Harvard's John Mack weighing in concurrently.
It appears that the media blitz is underway, and that Jones and company are involved with it.
A coordinated media campaign, called in real time by a witness applying structural analysis in 1992. Now the counter case, because it deserves the floor. Every fact in this act has an innocent reading. Rich men fund strange things. That is practically what rich men are for. A reigning prince with a sincere lifelong interest in the paranormal, which Hans Adam publicly had, is not an intelligence operation. He is a hobbyist with a bank. Publishers chase trends. The abduction wave was a trend. Media clusters happen without a conductor. The Roper questions were designed by true believers, Hopkins, Jacobs, who needed no handler to want a big number. And Durant himself, the man whose monograph anchors this act, wrote on page 1 that he reaches no conclusions. All true. The mundane explanation sits at the table every time. But note what the mundane explanation cannot do. It cannot explain why the money kept flowing toward monitoring and away from research. And it cannot explain the next act at all. Robert Bigelow made his fortune in extended stay real estate, Budget Suites of America, Las Vegas. His origin story, told in his own interviews, begins in 1947. His grandparents on a canyon road outside the city, a glowing object filling the windshield before shooting away. He heard the story as a boy, around age 10. That is self-reported and unverifiable, and we present it as exactly that. What is documented is the money. By a 1998 newspaper profiles account, his intense personal quest began in 1988, the year before Bob Lazar went on Las Vegas television. By the early 90s, Bigelow is the American co-sponsor of the Roper Poll and a funder of the MIT conference. By 1994, he proposes and begins financing a coalition of the major civilian UFO organizations, MUFON, the Center for UFO Studies, the Fund for UFO Research. A MUFON year-end report states it flatly. The coalition was initially formed under the sponsorship of Robert Bigelow. The billionaire did not build a network. He bought into one that Jones and the Prince and the Rockefeller money had already assembled, and for a while he was its treasury. Then in July 1995, at a coalition meeting in Seattle, a rupture. The record preserves both sides. The coalition members, by MUFON's own internal account, behaved badly, emotions prevailing instead of logical thinking. One memo says, Bigelow's funds were cut off abruptly, 1 week after MUFON had made financial commitments against them. By November 1995, a coalition letter is celebrating that, quote, Bigelow's strange influence has been removed. By the following March, they are drafting letters trying to get him back, and a circular notes he might receive the coalition's new publication after old debts are paid to us. It reads like a divorce, and buried inside the divorce paperwork is the single most analytically important document of the Bigelow era. March the 10th, 1996. John Schuessler, MUFON's second-in-command, a senior McDonnell Douglas aerospace executive, writes a private memo assessing Bigelow. And he describes, with an engineer's admiration, what Bigelow actually wanted to build.
He showed that he recognized that they were all the same thing. By the way, he wanted to configure his institute into 3 arms. Having these 3 arms working in sync with each other could allow progress to be made via a spillover of results that can be mutually useful while doing research that may take many different tracks.
3 arms working in sync: UFOs, animal mutilations, crop circles, abductions, psychic phenomena, separate collection streams feeding one central analysis with spillover between them. Listeners of this series have heard that architecture before. It is not how hobbyists talk, it is how collection managers talk. Multi-stream, cross-domain, centrally fused. Whether Bigelow arrived at it by instinct, by advice, or by direction, the vision Schuessler recorded in 1996 is an intelligence architecture. And that assessment is our analysis, clearly flagged, of a documented memo.
I need to disclose something here, and the season has been building to it. I ran MUFON, International Director, 2006 to 2010. In 2009, I signed the contract under which Bigelow's aerospace company bought MUFON's field investigation data. $56,000 a month. Every legacy case, every consenting witness, straight into a government-funded pipeline my investigators knew nothing about. So when I tell you this network recruits civilian research structures and converts them into collection assets, I'm not theorizing. I countersigned it. That's episode 12. Here in 1996, you're watching the rehearsal.
Because what Bigelow does after the coalition refuses him is the rehearsal. Sometime around 1995, by MUFON's internal postmortem, Bigelow, quote, got wind of repeated UFO sightings and cattle mutilations in the Uintah Basin of Utah. He focused a lot on one ranch. He asked the coalition to field a team there for as long as it took. He said he would finance anything the coalition could do. In a nutshell, the memo says, the coalition said no. So he bought it. The deed records show the ranch passing from the Sherman family to a Bigelow entity in the fall of 1996. He hired his own specialists, installed real-time instrumentation, observation towers, and staffed his new National Institute for Discovery Science with, in its own deputy administrator's later words, PhD scientists, retired FBI, and AFOSI investigators. AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, the agency whose documented disinformation operation broke Paul Benowitz in Episode 8. Its alumni now staffed a billionaire's private paranormal institute, documented in the institute's own historical overview. And here the episode reaches the piece of tape that justifies its existence. The ranch Bigelow bought is the one the world now knows as Skinwalker, sold to television as a property with centuries of terrifying history. The family that owned it from 1933 to 1994 says otherwise. Garth Myers, brother of the late owner, a physician, interviewed on tape by a Utah State University plant physiologist named Frank Salisbury, said this, and it is a recorded quote.
I can tell you unequivocally that up to 1992 there had never been, and there never were, any signs of that.
His sister-in-law lived alone on that ranch from 1987 to 1992. Nothing. The anomalies begin in 1994 with the arrival of the Sherman family, who owned it for barely 2 years before selling to Bigelow. And when the later best-selling book about the ranch appeared, the Sherman patriarch himself told Salisbury that much of it only resembled a true accounting of his experiences, that he had never met its co-author face-to-face and didn't know a book existed until it was published. About a month after the purchase, Bigelow telephoned Garth Myers and asked why the family had never told anyone about the UFOs. Myers told him there weren't any until the Shermans came, and Bigelow's recorded answer through Myers's testimony was, "Oh, you're not telling me the truth." Myers ended the call. "If you don't believe it, I guess we don't need to talk anymore."
That exchange is the whole episode in miniature. A primary source, the man whose family owned the land for 60 years, contradicts the narrative, and the buyer's response is not curiosity. It's, "You're not telling me the truth." The ranch didn't have a haunted history, it got one. And the provenance was defended against the one person best positioned to falsify it. Whatever Bigelow is, believer, entrepreneur, or something more managed, that is narrative construction, documented in the previous owner's own recorded words.
Meanwhile, the network Bigelow had left did not die. It found new money and produced the era's most consequential document. Lawrence Rockefeller put roughly $30,000 behind a slim volume called Unidentified Flying Objects, the best available evidence, a briefing document assembled through a New York foundation run by Marie Bootsy Galbraith. The university archive that holds Scott Jones's papers describes the Rockefeller relationship in one remarkable sentence. His support was conditional on a program designed to get the United States government to acknowledge the existence of alien life. And how was this disclosure document distributed? Not to the public, to people of influence, senior politicians, foreign heads of state, the United Nations. A 1996 coalition circular survives in which one New York researcher is explicitly denied a copy because, quote, he is not considered a person of great influence. A disclosure movement that gatekeeps information by influence is not a disclosure movement. It is an influence operation, and that sentence is our analysis of documented distribution instructions. Even its architects occasionally said the quiet part. Galbraith herself, in the era's press coverage, observed that, quote, treating this information in a non-serious way is a very intelligent disinformation technique. She meant the government's ridicule of UFOs. Read it the other way, and it describes the next 20 years of managed seriousness with uncomfortable precision. Which brings us to the through line, people. Inside the 1996 coalition correspondence sits a book review memo by the physicist Hal Puthoff, the SRI remote viewing co-founder, endorsing a gravity control reading of UFO propulsion. 21 years later, Puthoff co-founds To the Stars and briefs the press behind the 2017 Times story. He also chairs the Science Board of Bigelow's NIDS, a chair he inherits from Kit Green, the CIA's Weird Desk alumnus who attended MIT in '92. John Alexander, the Los Alamos colonel from the MIT conference, becomes one of NIDS's first employees out at the ranch. The same half-dozen names rotating through every successive institution for 30 years. Analysts of this network, including sympathetic ones, call it the circularity problem. When successive programs are advised by the same small cast, what looks like independent corroboration may be one information stream, refracted through many institutional prisms. All of those individuals are, we stress, people documented as present in this network. The record shows placement and continuity. It does not show, and we do not claim, that any of them committed any concealed act. Placement is documented, purpose is contested. That distinction is this series' spine, and we will not blur it.
So run the ledger for 1996, a cutout with 15 years of naval intelligence, formally inside MUFON. A prince funding the abduction baseline. A Rockefeller funding conditional disclosure with White House access. A billionaire who wanted a 3-armed collection institute, staffed with AFOSI veterans, operating a ranch whose legend the previous owners call fiction. Every piece incorporated, every piece legal, every piece private, which means no FOIA, no oversight, no Records Act. If you wanted to run belief management in peacetime, this is exactly what it would look like. And if you wanted it to be innocent, honestly, it would look exactly the same. That's why the flag on this episode says contested, but the infrastructure itself documented end to end.
The lesson of the infrastructure is about camouflage. When a belief becomes worth money and access, the people who manage it stop looking like spies and start looking like a foundation, a pole, and a nonprofit. Seed the clinicians. Amplify through the conference and the book contract. Manage the provenance, even against the family that owned the land. Harvest the access, a first lady, a science advisor, a prince, a Senate office. Seed, amplify, manage, harvest. The grammar has not changed since 1942, only the letterhead. And so one more time, who benefits? Follow Durant's arrow. The information and the money flowed toward the network, from the believers, from the clinicians, from the public. Whoever sat at the point of that arrow benefited. The record so far keeps their receipt. Next time on the deception thread. In 2007, the network stopped needing private money. A senator from Nevada made a phone call, a contract went out for bid with one plausible bidder, and the 3-armed institute Schuessler described in 1996 acquired something it had never had before. A federal contract number. The Defense Intelligence Agency was about to write the check, and 10 years later, a newspaper story would be placed, not broken. The season finale. Episode 12, Place Not Broken.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. Remember, we don't teach you what to believe, we teach you how to think. This is the Circle Jerk.